Well, hello, everybody. This is James Bichelle. I know it's been a while since I've done a video on my channel, but this is personal. I'm starting to write a book. Well, I don't know. It's not a book yet. I've only written a couple chapters, so I have an idea, a tangent idea, and I want to write it down. And hopefully, it's a good story. I've always considered myself a good idea man, not necessarily good at executing upon those ideas. I'm much better of a technical writer than I am a creative writer. But I'm not afraid to fail. I'm just afraid of not actually completing what I want to complete. So, what I want out of the reason why I'm doing this video, I'm not going to read my whole book on YouTube. That's not my goal. But my goal is to essentially just get feedback, whether it be positive or negative. I'd rather have honest feedback as opposed to blowing smoke up my ass or telling me that it's good when in reality it's not. I would like brutal honesty. Yeah, so I will go ahead and start reading. So the title of the book is The Shadows of Linden. It's written by James Bichelle. That's me. First chapter is called Things Left Behind. Quill meets paper. The scratching of the parchment reverberates throughout the room as the quill dances in the man's hand like two lovers on their wedding night. A bead of sweat drops from the man's brow onto the rough camel-colored parchment. Shit, said the man while slamming his fists on the table as he winces in pain. With haste, the man finished the last of his scribbling, took the parchment, folded it in half, and then in half again and placed it in an envelope. Normally, the man would have sealed the envelope with a bit of hot wax, like he did with the other three. However, he had run out of time. Sweating profusely, the man quickly got up and pushed the wooden chair under the large wooden table. He looked out the window. The moon was hanging high and full in the sky that night, and the stars were as bright as ever. He had always felt that the moon and the stars looked more vibrant when he was in Anoth, being far enough away from the blinding lights of Linden. Anoth was his oasis in the Keladin forest, one that belonged to his family for generations, the village within the trees that his ancestors built with the blessing of Anon herself. At this moment, however, he was overcome with melancholy, as he was believed this was potentially the last time he might see his home. The man sauntered quietly to the other side of the room and looked himself in the mirror. He appeared to be in his mid-30s, handsome with long auburn hair, eyes of pure silver, and a finely groomed beard kept close to the face. He picked up his deep purple beret next to the mirror and placed it on his head. Another bead of sweat trickled down his forehead and into his eyes. The man closed them and muttered, "They will come. They must." He gazed back at himself and thought how he ended up in this predicament. He clenched his fist in anger. His breath grew heavy. But he then released when he heard the ever-familiar rhythmic knocking at his door. He quickly ran over to the desk and grabbed the 4 envelopes and opened the door. As he opened the door, the man was relieved to see a familiar face. He saw a man in his late 20s wearing a white robe and in his hand a giant gnarled walking stick. He had a plain look, one that didn't make him stand out in a positive or negative way. And the man liked him for that. He believed he was great at hiding in plain sight. The man in the robe then spoke. "Bergen, you must leave. They're making their move shortly, as we discussed." Bergen nodded. "I am, my friend, and I am forever grateful that you came to me when you did." Bergen handed the robed man the envelopes. "You know what to do. When these are delivered, meet me at the Bradbury in Linden." Bergen began to turn around but hesitated. "Oh, and Pierre, stay alive, my friend." With a wry smile, Bergen turned around and walked back towards the window. "I will do my best, sir. I will see you in a few days." Pierre then slowly closed the door. Bergen opened the window and the cool night air rushed into the room. He looked down upon his village. It was a sight to behold in this moment, as he never truly appreciated the majesty that was Anoth, a village completely built within the trees. Large wooden ramps from the forest floor connected the ground to the village proper. Tree houses littered the trees in a circular pattern, all linked by a large wooden road. Until this moment, Bergen never thought about the logistics of how his ancestors built Anoth. Was it a miraculous feat of engineering? Was it magic? He may never know. At this moment, he saw the mob of men quietly leaving the meeting hall from the tree across the way from his and were beginning to make their way to him. Generally, Bergen will be asleep at this hour. He was one who always believed that the early bird gets the worm. But Pierre warned him that this would happen earlier in the day. Bergen sighed. Well, Anon, I must leave your sanctuary for the time being. I will be back, I promise. I will make things right, and the shadows of Linden will be yours once again. Bergen grasped at the medallion that hung from his neck. The medallion was affixed to a silver chain and hung down to the middle of Bergen's chest. It was in the shape of a crescent moon and was sharp on both edges. As he held the medallion, he began to mutter an incantation of sorts in the dead language of the elves, beings long extinct. As the muttering grew louder, his medallion began to hum, and then a blue energy began to emanate from the medallion and began to swirl around and cover Bergen's skin. His skin went from a tan hue and turned pitch black. Feathers began to coalesce where skin once was, and then his limbs began to shrink. His arms now wings and his legs as thin as twigs. Looking out the window was no longer a man, but a bird. Perched on the windowsill, the large black bird let out a caw, spread its wings, and disappeared into the night sky. As Bergen flew away, he looked back at his village among the trees. So that was the first chapter. I feel pretty good about that chapter. It's this chapter that it's the second chapter I came up with. I don't know how I feel about it, but just, let me know what you think. So this chapter is called The Disgraced Knight Divine. The sun was beginning to rise in Faerun. Ulan laid wide awake. He was laying in his sleeping roll next to 4 other men in a makeshift tent. The air was awash with the smell of sweat, blood, and methane. Ulan sighed. Wake up, boys. The Empire won't repel itself. The men began to wake. They all had slept in their leathers, for battle could be upon them at any time. The youngest of the men was the last awake. Ulan always felt sorrow when he looked upon the young man. He believed that Justin should be learning how to flirt with girls, having a good time with friends, and learning how to trim that thin, wispy mustache he was trying so desperately to grow. Unfortunately, young men in the Falklands don't have that luxury as it borders the Idaean Empire. As Justin awoke, he looked over to the standing Ulan, who was putting his chainmail doublet on over his boiled leathers. He was a tall and powerful man, built like an ox. He had long gray hair that fell down to his shoulders. He appeared to be in his early 40s and had a perpetual scowl on his face to go along with a furrowed brow resting upon his sharp blue eyes. Sergeant, what's on the agenda today? The young Justin said to the grizzled Ulan. Hopefully staying alive. The 4 men left the tent. On their chainmail doublets, they had matching emblems emblazoned on the front, a white shield with a red rose. Aside from Ulan and Justin, there was Felix, a man in his 20s, portly and unremarkable in every way, and there was Edwin, an older man with brown teeth, a giant hooked nose, and an eye patch. Edwin claimed to be a sailor, but Ulan didn't believe him because he knew Edwin couldn't swim. As they walked through the battle camp, the 4 would notice soldiers of the Falkland Army scowling and sneering at them. One such soldier walked up to the group and spit a phlegmy glob of mucus at their feet. Sellswords. Can't trust a lot of you. You may be on our side today, but if the Empire offered more coin, you would jump ship faster than a one-legged whore. Justin turned red with anger. I would never. I'm a Falky just like you. It's not my... Ulan lifts his arm. Come, Justin. It's not worth it. The men move on. The 4 men come across the rest of their company eating breakfast in the common tent. The common tent was massive, with 8 large tables enough to sit hundreds of men. The sellswords kept to themselves at one table as the rest of the Falkland Army took up the rest. At the north end of the tent, there was a station set up where the cooks were serving food. The 4 men joined the line. Ulan held his plate in front of the cook as he plopped down some suspect scrambled eggs and 2 pieces of floppy bacon. Ulan, as always, was unimpressed with his unimpressive breakfast. Ulan and his men found a spot at their company table with 4 empty spots and sat. The man sitting across from Ulan was a man he didn't recognize. The man with wide eyes looked at Ulan's glove and the silver medallion that was sewn into the leather. The silver medallion was that of an eye wide open. So it's true then, eh? You're a former knight divine, a shifter. Ulan ignored the man and continued shoveling the suspect eggs into his mouth as bit would fall into his ratty beard. Justin looked at the man and put his fork down. Look, you must be new to the Crimson Shield. Rule number 1 is don't steal from your fellow shield brother, and rule number 2 is don't ask the sergeant about his past. The man looked startled and with a stutter, I'm truly sorry. And he looked back at Ulan and was shocked that the sergeant was playing with his flimsy bacon. As Ulan was shaking his flimsy bacon, a man slapped him on the shoulder. He wore the same colors as the others, except he wore a crown on his head. He gazed at the crown and rolled his eyes. Your Majesty, he said with contempt. Sergeant, A word, please, he said in a deep, commanding voice. Ulan didn't know the king of the sellswords and the Crimson Shield well, but he knew that's how Commander Brask would introduce himself. Ulan, you have mail. It came this morning. The sergeant gazed at the curious envelope. On the front it said, to Ulan, and on the back it was sealed with a wax seal in the shape of a crow. Bergen, that bastard. What could he want? He thought to himself. Hopefully nothing too important, Brask said with a brusque tone. The Falkland Scouts have reported increased activity on the Idaean side of the border. The Crimson Shield is to patrol the outskirts of Faerun, and of course I need the fabled divine knight Ulan leading that patrol. The brusque tone had softened, and with it, a wry grin. Yes, your majesty, Ulan said with a sarcastic bow. The sergeant left the king of sellswords and the Crimson Shield and went back to sit with his unit. He carefully opened the envelope and pulled out the parchment. Ulan, my old friend, the bird is caged. Come to Linden. Anything important, sir? Asked Justin. Ulan took the short letter and crumpled it up. Perhaps, but I have a duty here. There's been increased activity on the Idaean border, so we're to patrol the outskirts of Faerun. The sergeant took 20 men and began their patrol. Faerun, the capital of Falklands, was once a bustling metropolis and a hub of trade and economic activity, back when the Empire and the Menelek Republic were on friendly terms, of course. Ulan and 20 good men began to patrol the dilapidated streets of the east end of Faerun. Ulan was in front, silently directing the men to lay low and move silently through the now empty cobblestone roads. The roads were flanked on both sides by large ramshackle buildings devoid of life, evidence that once upon a time Faerun was subject to robust commerce. The rotund Felix was in the rear trying to catch up. Justin walked up to the stuttering new recruit. What's your name? Justin asked politely and quietly. Rogan, he said with a slight stutter. Justin looked to his right and then his left and replied, is this your first real action? Rogan emulated Justin and looked to his right and left before replying. Yes. I guess Brask is desperate, eh? Taking anyone off the street nowadays. First Justin and now this stuttering idiot, remarked the eavesdropping Edwin. The men came to a large intersection and turned east. Justin gave Edwin a coy look. You know more than anyone I can hold me own. And unlike you sorry sods, I'm actually fighting for something, Justin said with his head held high. Edwin was not impressed. Yes, the naive boy who loves his country. Too young to join the fight, so he ran off and joined a group of sellswords. You call it noble, I call it stupid. All that matters is I live another day, get me coin, get me a last for the night. Justin heard a thud and then was covered in blood. A bolt from a crossbow had taken Edwin through the throat and through the back of his skull, and the salty sailor had nothing else to say. Ulan immediately yelled, "Get down now." A volley of arrows rained down on the men. Felix, who was trying to catch up in the rear and was not so lucky. He did not hear the warning and ran into a deluge of arrows, one catching him in one of his chins, another through the thigh, and one to the groin. He fell immediately. Ulan looked over the counter of the wooden merchant stand he was using as cover. He saw a unit of Empire soldiers about the same size as his knocking another round of arrows. Ulan quickly signaled the men to move into a nearby side alley. Half the men were laying on the other side of the cobblestone road and had to cross it to get to the alleyway. As the man began the arduous crossing, the knocked arrows were loosed. They soared through the sky for what seemed like an eternity. Instincts took over and Ulan touched the silver eye medallion affixed to his glove. Rogan looked in amazement as the eye from Ulan's glove began to blink. And then there appeared to be tears flowing from the medallion. The tears coalesced into a swirling blue energy that formed into a 20-foot divine shield. The arrows smashed into the shield and fell to the ground as the men crossed the street unharmed. The remaining men gathered within the alley. Ulan cleared his throat. We must get back now and inform the Falkland commanders that the Empire is coming. Justin enthusiastically agreed. Ulan saw the urgency in Justin, but the rest of the men looked disheveled. Ulan knew Justin was a patriot. The rest were simple sellswords, but he wanted to get them back to camp safely all the same. The men began to shuffle out through the other side of the alley. Ulan was the first to exit the alley and was waving the rest of his unit through. As the man began to shuffle out, Ulan looked over his shoulder and saw what he didn't want to see. Another cadre of Empire longbowmen with their arrows knocked. Ulan gasped as the arrows were loose, soaring through the skies like a flock of migrating birds. One by one, Ulan saw his men fall. First, Rogan, on his first mission, took an arrow through the eye and one in the gut. The young Justin took 3 quarrels in the chest as he fell in front of Ulan. The sergeant looked on in horror as all of his men fell. He then felt the sharp pain in his calf and shoulder and fell to the ground. As Ulan laid on that cobblestone street, his gaze met the lifeless visage of the once fervent Justin. He felt his boiled leathers filling with blood. As he began losing consciousness, he had fleeting visions of Justin learning how to flirt with girls, having a good time with friends, and learning how to trim that thin, wispy mustache he was trying so desperately to grow. Things he believed Justin should have experienced instead of being cut down by a random hail of arrows. In his mind's eye, he tried to recall his wife and daughter. He'd almost forgot what they had looked like, but eventually he was able to recall the details. Unfortunately, the fleeting memories were cut short by the marching of the Empire's men. He then closed his eyes. When Ulan woke up, he could see the moon hanging high in the air. The stench of the dead was so strong, and he could see the stench of the dead was strong, and he could see the Falkland camp was set ablaze. He was not sure what to do. Bergen, the grizzled sergeant thought. He stood up, and his wounds were closed, and the arrows that were in his shoulder and calf were no longer there. He rubbed the silver medallion on his glove. Thank you, Orthos. Ulan walked west through the empty streets of Faerun and into the Kaladin forest. So that's both of my. That's what I wrote so far. Like I said, I'm looking for honesty, honest opinions. Did it interest you at all? Did the first 2 chapters hook you? Is it something I mean, I'm still going to pursue it, but give me some maybe tips on the prose or things I need to improve upon. Yeah, so you can put your comments in the YouTube comments, or you could message me on Facebook or on Twitter. That information will be in the description. But yeah, so that's what I've written so far. Let me know what you think. Once again, I'm looking for brutal honesty if need be. But yeah, thank you guys.